Welcome to our deep dive today. We're
Yeah.
going to be tackling a topic I think we all grapple with,
Yeah.
overcoming obstacles and finding opportunity in adversity.
Mm,
You've given us a really interesting mix of materials to work with this time.
yeah.
We've got excerpts from The Obstacle is the Way,
Right.
quotes from figures like Emerson, and even Mike Tyson.
Oh, wow.
So let's jump right in and see what we can uncover.
I think what's really compelling about your sources is the blend of ancient wisdom,
Okay.
particularly from the Stoics and modern day examples.
hmm
It gives us both a philosophical framework and real world applications to consider.
The first section focuses on this idea of will,
Okay.
which is a core concept in Stoic philosophy.
Right.
How would you explain will to someone who's maybe hearing about this for the first time?
Well, the Stoics believed that our will is this internal power, this
Right.
force inside of us that's completely separate from and unaffected by the external world. It's our capacity to choose our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions,
Yeah.
regardless of what's happening around us.
And the sources use the story of Abraham Lincoln as a prime example of someone who really cultivated this inner strength.
Right. Lincoln's story is particularly interesting because he faced some pretty intense personal challenges,
Yeah.
including this lifelong battle with what we would now recognize as clinical depression.
The sources describe it as crippling,
Uh-huh.
and even mention that he came close to suicide on a couple of occasions.
And yet he went on to lead the nation through one of its most turbulent periods,
Right.
the Civil War.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, how did he do it?
Yeah.
How did he not only cope, but thrive amidst such intense personal and professional pressure? Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think this is where that Stoic idea of building an inner citadel comes in.
Right.
It's like building this mental fortress that can't be breached by external events. Lincoln, through necessity, developed coping mechanisms and practices that allowed him to weather incredible storms.
hmm
And what's even more remarkable is that his struggles seem to fuel his empathy and resilience.
It's almost as if facing those internal battles prepared him for the monumental task of leading a divided nation through the Civil War.
Yeah.
So what can we learn from Lincoln's experience?
Right.
Can we actually train ourselves to develop this kind of unwavering will?
That's a great question. And I think the sources offer some clues.
Okay.
It's not about becoming emotionless or ignoring challenges.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose how we respond to those challenges.
So it's more about consciously shaping our reactions
Yeah.
rather than trying to suppress them.
Precisely, the Stoics would argue that our will is like a muscle.
Okay.
The more we exercise it, the
Yeah.
stronger it becomes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the importance of cultivating a strong internal will,
Mm-hmm.
but the sources then shift to the idea of anticipating obstacles.
Mm.
It's like they're saying, okay, you've got this inner strength,
Okay.
but now let's get strategic.
Right. And this is where the concept of the premortem comes in.
Yeah.
It's a technique where you essentially imagine all the ways a plan could go wrong before you even start.
Kind of like a mental dress rehearsal for failure.
Exactly. And it might sound pessimistic,
Right.
but the sources argue that it's actually a powerful way to prepare for the inevitable challenges that come with any endeavor.
Okay.
There's a story in here about a CEO who uses premortems with her team before launching any new project.
So instead of just focusing on the positive,
Yeah.
they sit down and say, okay, let's imagine this all blows up.
Right.
What are the potential pitfalls?
Yeah.
Where are the weak points?
Mm.
How can we mitigate those risks?
That's a really good summary.
Okay.
And by doing this, they're not just identifying potential problems, they're also fostering a culture of preparedness and open communication.
And that leads to more realistic expectations, which is something a lot of us struggle with.
Absolutely. The sources highlight how often we set ourselves up for disappointment by clinging to these idealistic visions of how things should be.
Right.
We get so attached to a particular outcome that we fail to consider alternative scenarios.
There's that great Mike Tyson quote that really hits home.
Right.
Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
It's a blunt but effective way of saying that life rarely goes according to plan.
Exactly. And this ties into another Stoic principle that's really relevant here.
Okay.
The art of acquiescence.
Okay.
It's this idea of accepting what you can't control.
I think a lot of people misinterpret this idea as being passive or giving up,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really about focusing your energy on what you can influence.
You've got it. The sources offer some really inspiring examples of people who embodied this principle.
All right.
Take Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence. Can you believe he had a speech impediment?
I had no idea.
Right.
It's amazing to think that someone who crafted such eloquent and powerful words struggled to speak publicly.
Right, but instead of letting that limitation define him, he channeled his energy into writing.
Hmm.
And ultimately, he found his voice through the written word.
It's a great example of how sometimes our limitations can actually guide us toward our strengths.
Yeah.
The sources also mention Thomas Edison, who was nearly deaf,
Yep.
and Helen Keller, who was both deaf and blind.
Extraordinary individuals who achieved incredible things despite, or perhaps because of their limitations.
Yeah, it completely flips the script on how we typically view obstacles, doesn't it?
It does. Instead of seeing them as roadblocks, we can start to view them as opportunities for growth,
Right.
for developing resilience and resourcefulness.
Which leads us to another intriguing Stoic concept,
Yeah.
amor fati, or loving your fate.
Yeah.
This one's always a bit tricky for me, to be honest.
Okay.
How do you love something, especially when it's painful or difficult?
It's not about enjoying suffering.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that everything that happens to us, good or bad, is part of the tapestry of our lives. The sources offer some compelling examples to illustrate this idea.
Yeah.
Remember the story about the fire that destroyed Thomas Edison's factory?
Right. Years of work, millions of dollars in damage, all gone in a flash.
And how did Edison react? With despair, anger. No, he saw it as a chance to start fresh,
Right.
to clear out the rubbish and rebuild something even better.
It's such an unusual perspective, especially in the face of such a devastating loss.
And it highlights the power of choosing our response. We can choose to wallow in the negative,
Yeah.
or we can choose to look for the opportunity, the potential for growth that's often hidden within the obstacle.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense.
Yeah.
But how do we actually cultivate that kind of perspective? How do we learn to love the things that are hard to love?
Well, perhaps we can find some answers by looking at another powerful example from the sources.
Okay.
The story of boxer Jack Johnson.
Ah, yes. Johnson, who faced incredible racism and hatred throughout his career.
Imagine the pressure he must have felt going into his fight against Jim Jeffries. Yeah.
A fight fueled by racial prejudice and billed as the battle of the century.
And yet the sources describe him as being calm and even cheerful throughout the entire fight.
He didn't let the hate break him. He used his opponent's anger to his advantage, and he ultimately emerged victorious.
That takes a remarkable amount of inner strength and self-control.
It does, and I think it demonstrates how amor fati isn't about passive acceptance.
Okay.
It's about actively choosing how we engage with our circumstances, even the difficult ones.
So it's about finding the good, or at least the potential for growth in every situation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even our struggles, our failures, our heartbreaks, they all contribute to who we are.
Yeah.
They shape our character, they teach us valuable lessons, and they ultimately make us stronger.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the next big idea we want to explore, the concept of perseverance.
Absolutely. And the sources draw an important distinction between persistence, which is focused effort towards a specific goal,
and perseverance, which is that long-term endurance, that ability to keep going even when you're facing repeated obstacles. It's that never give up attitude.
They use the classic example of Odysseus's 10-year journey home from Troy,
Right.
which was filled with storms, monsters, captivity, and all sorts of setbacks.
Yeah, he faced more than his fair share of obstacles.
He did.
Yet he never gave up on his goal of returning home. That unwavering commitment to the journey,
Yeah.
even when the path is uncertain and fraught with danger,
Right.
that's the essence of perseverance.
It makes you think in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable, that kind of resilience is more important than ever.
Absolutely. And it's something that we can actively cultivate. The sources even quote Emerson here,
Yeah.
lamenting the lack of perseverance he observed in his own time.
Right.
It's a challenge to us even today to cultivate this vital trait.
So how do we do that? How do we develop this never give up attitude when faced with repeated setbacks?
Well, one strategy that the sources suggest is to focus on something bigger than ourselves.
Right.
They highlight the incredible story of James Stockdale,
Right.
the highest-ranking Navy POW during the Vietnam War.
Stockdale endured years of captivity, torture, and uncertainty,
Yeah.
yet he never lost hope.
And what's fascinating is that he found strength and purpose not by focusing on his own suffering,
Right.
but by focusing on leading and supporting his fellow prisoners. He put their well-being above his own.
It's a remarkable example of resilience and selflessness.
It is.
And it suggests that finding a cause, a purpose that transcends our own individual needs and desires can be a powerful source of strength during difficult times.
Exactly. It could be your family, your community, a social cause you believe in,
Right.
anything that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose beyond yourself.
And I think that's a really important point, especially in today's world where it's so easy to get caught up in our own little bubbles.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're all connected, that we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. And that brings us to a somewhat paradoxical but fascinating concept,
Okay.
the idea of meditating on our own mortality.
This is where the Stoics really seem to excel in finding opportunity in adversity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who thinks about death to feel better about life?
Right. It might sound counterintuitive, but the sources argue that contemplating our own mortality can actually be a powerful tool for appreciating life.
Oh.
And for facing challenges with courage.
Mm-hmm.
They point to Michel de Montaigne,
Right.
the French nobleman who had a near-death experience after being thrown from a horse.
Wow.
This experience completely transformed his perspective on life and death.
So it's not about dwelling on the morbid or becoming fearful.
No.
It's about using the awareness of our limited time
Yeah.
to live more intentionally.
Exactly. The Stoic practice of memento mori,
Yeah.
remembering that we are mortal,
Right.
can help us prioritize what truly matters.
Mm-hmm.
Let go of trivial concerns
Right.
and approach each day with a sense of gratitude.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What would we do differently if we lived each day as if it were our last? What would we prioritize? What would we finally have the courage to do?
Those are powerful questions, and it leads us to another important realization.
Okay.
The idea that overcoming obstacles is not a one-time event.
Okay.
It's a continuous cycle.
So it's not about reaching some mythical state of obstacle-free existence.
Not at all. The sources emphasize that overcoming one obstacle often leads to new and sometimes even bigger challenges.
Right.
The journey of overcoming obstacles never truly ends. It's about continually adapting and growing.
It reminds me of that Haitian proverb,
Yeah.
behind mountains are more mountains.
Yeah.
It speaks to this idea that there's always another peak to climb, another challenge to conquer.
Precisely. And I think that's an important realization because it frees us from the pressure of striving for some perfect, problem-free existence.
Right.
It allows us to embrace the journey itself
Yeah.
with all its ups and downs.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from cultivating a strong will to anticipating challenges,
Yeah.
from accepting what we can't control to finding strength in something larger than ourselves,
Right.
and even embracing our own mortality. It's been quite a journey.
It has, but I believe we have even more fascinating terrain to cover. Perhaps we should pause here
Okay.
and resume our exploration in the next part of our deep dive.
Agreed. But before we go, I want to leave you with a thought to ponder. What obstacle are you facing right now?
Yeah.
And how can you turn it into a path forward? We'll pick up right here next time
Okay.
and delve even deeper into the art of turning obstacles into opportunities. Until then, keep exploring.
Great.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
We've been exploring how to turn obstacles into opportunities, drawing wisdom from ancient Stoic philosophy
Right.
and some really inspiring modern-day examples.
It's been a fascinating discussion, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We've seen how cultivating a strong will,
Right.
anticipating challenges,
Right.
accepting what we can't control, right, and even finding strength in something larger than ourselves
Yeah.
can help us navigate the inevitable obstacles that life throws our way.
And before we took a break,
Right.
you mentioned that we had even more ground to cover,
Yeah.
particularly this idea of the obstacle becoming the way.
Mm.
I'm really intrigued by that concept.
It's a powerful idea, and the sources use a rather unexpected story to illustrate it.
Okay.
The story of Marcus Aurelius,
Mhm.
the Roman emperor, and the rebellion led by Avidius Cassius.
Ah, yes, the rebellion against one of the most famous Stoic philosophers in history.
Yeah.
What a fascinating juxtaposition.
It really is. Here you have Marcus Aurelius,
Right.
this advocate for reason, virtue, and self-control, facing a betrayal from one of his closest allies,
Yeah.
a threat to his rule and potentially his life.
And his response is what's so remarkable, right?
Yeah.
Instead of seeking revenge or meeting violence with violence, he chooses a different path.
Exactly. He focuses on forgiveness, on setting a positive example even in the midst of a civil war.
Wow.
The sources quote him as saying, I will show everyone that there is a right way to deal even with civil wars.
It's an incredibly powerful statement.
It is, and it really highlights this idea that we always have a choice in how we respond to adversity.
Yeah.
Even when faced with betrayal and violence,
Hmm.
we can choose a path of compassion and understanding.
And that's what's so inspiring about this story.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius' obstacle, this rebellion,
Mm,
became an opportunity for him to practice his philosophy on a grand scale.
right.
It became a way for him to demonstrate the power of forgiveness and virtue.
It's interesting because even though most of us will never face a rebellion against our rule,
Right.
we all encounter obstacles and setbacks in our own lives.
Absolutely. And the takeaway here is that we can choose how we respond to those challenges.
Yeah.
We can choose to see obstacles as roadblocks,
Mm,
as reasons to give up or become bitter.
right.
Or we can choose to see them as opportunities for growth and learning.
It's about embracing that stoic idea of turning the obstacle upside down, finding the good in the bad, and using challenges as fuel for growth.
Precisely. And throughout this deep dive,
Yeah,
we've seen countless examples of individuals who have done just that.
right.
They've faced adversity head on.
Yeah,
They've adapted.
yeah,
They've persevered.
right.
And they've emerged stronger and wiser.
From Abraham Lincoln's battle with depression to Thomas Edison's response to his factory fire,
Right.
from Helen Keller's triumph over disability to James Stockdale's leadership in a POW camp.
Wow.
Their stories are a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity.
And while their stories are extraordinary,
Yeah.
the principles they embody are universal.
It's not about being a stoic philosopher or a historical figure. It's
No.
about recognizing that we all have the capacity to turn obstacles into opportunities,
Yeah.
to find meaning in adversity, and to emerge from challenges stronger than before.
You know, one thing that struck me while going through these sources
Yeah.
is the emphasis on the difference between persistence and perseverance.
Yes. That's an important distinction.
Right. Persistence is about focusing intensely on a specific problem until it breaks.
Right.
While perseverance is about the long game,
Yeah.
the ability to keep going even when faced with a series of setbacks. It's that never give up attitude.
And the sources actually use the analogy of a wave crashing against a rock.
Okay.
Persistence is like that single powerful wave that might eventually erode the rock.
Right.
Perseverance, on the other hand, is like the constant, relentless tide that eventually wears the rock down over time.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And it highlights how important it is to develop that long-term vision, that ability to see beyond the immediate challenge and stay focused on the ultimate goal.
And speaking of goals,
Right.
the sources make this interesting point about how achieving a goal,
Okay.
even a significant one, isn't always the end of the story.
That's right. They argue that overcoming one obstacle often leads to new,
Yeah.
and sometimes even bigger challenges.
It's like that Haitian proverb, behind mountains are more mountains.
Right.
There's always another peak to climb, another challenge to conquer.
It reminds us that the journey of overcoming obstacles never truly ends.
Right.
It's about continually adapting and growing.
So it's not about reaching some mythical state of obstacle-free existence.
Right.
It's about embracing the journey itself with all its ups and downs.
Exactly, and approaching that journey with a sense of excitement,
Yeah.
a sense of anticipation for what challenges lie ahead, because those challenges are what ultimately shape us,
Right.
what force us to grow, what make us stronger.
You know, it's interesting how the sources seem to frame obstacles, not just as things to be overcome,
Right.
but as opportunities to practice these stoic disciplines we've been discussing.
That's a key insight.
Yep.
It's about seeing every obstacle, every challenge, as a chance to cultivate our will, to practice acceptance, to find meaning and purpose.
So it's not about avoiding obstacles or hoping for a life free of challenges.
Right.
It's about developing the skills and the mindset to navigate those challenges effectively.
Precisely, it's about becoming, as the sources put it, worthy of any and every challenge.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of perseverance,
Right.
of viewing obstacles as opportunities for growth, and of embracing the continuous nature of the journey.
Yeah, what are some specific strategies or tools we can use to actually turn those obstacles upside down to find the opportunity within the challenge?
That's a great question, and I
Hmm.
think there are a few key takeaways we can distill from the sources.
Well, let's start with perception.
Okay.
How can we shift our perspective to see obstacles as opportunities?
The sources emphasize the importance of seeing things clearly,
Okay.
of letting go of our preconceived notions and biases,
Hmm.
and viewing the world with objective eyes.
Right.
It's about recognizing that our initial perception of an obstacle might be clouded by fear, frustration, or disappointment.
So instead of getting caught up in the emotional reaction,
Yeah.
we need to take a step back
Yeah.
and try to see the situation for what it really is.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly challenging,
Yeah.
especially when we're in the midst of a difficult situation. But the sources suggest some practical techniques we can use.
Okay.
For example, try asking yourself questions like,
All right.
what can I learn from this situation?
Yeah.
Or what opportunities might be hidden within this challenge?
Those are great questions. I think they really force you to shift your perspective
Yeah.
and start looking for the possibilities instead of dwelling on the problems.
Exactly. And once we start to shift our perception,
Okay.
we can move on to the next key element,
Okay.
action.
Okay. So we've clarified our perspective.
Yeah.
We've identified potential opportunities. Now what?
Yeah.
How do we actually act with courage and determination?
The sources emphasize the importance of taking responsibility for our choices,
Okay.
of pursuing our goals with energy and persistence,
Right.
and of never giving up in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
It's about moving forward even when we're afraid, even when we don't have all the answers.
So it's about embracing that just do it mentality,
Yeah.
but with a sense of purpose and intention.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that action doesn't always mean making grand gestures or taking drastic measures.
Right.
Sometimes the most courageous action is simply taking that first step, no matter how small it might seem.
It could be something as simple as reaching out for help making a phone call
Yeah.
or setting aside 15 minutes each day to work on a project. It's about building momentum
Yeah.
and taking consistent action towards our goals.
Precisely. And the more we act,
Right.
the more confident and capable we become.
Yeah.
It's a self-reinforcing cycle.
Okay, so we've talked about perception and action.
Right.
What about the final element, we'll say? How do we cultivate that inner strength to endure and persevere through challenges?
This goes back to what we were discussing earlier about cultivating our internal will.
Right.
The sources remind us that we have the power to choose our response to any situation.
Yeah.
We can choose to let external events dictate our emotions and actions,
Mhm.
or we can choose to remain calm, centered, and focused, even in the midst of chaos.
It's about developing that inner resilience, that ability to bounce back from setbacks and keep moving forward.
Exactly. And the sources suggest several practices that can help us strengthen our will.
Right.
Things like mindfulness meditation and journaling can be incredibly powerful tools for cultivating self-awareness and emotional regulation.
And it's important to remember that this is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
We don't just wake up one day with an unbreakable will.
Right.
It's something we need to nurture and cultivate over time.
Absolutely. It's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
The more we exercise our will, the stronger it becomes. And the more we practice these stoic disciplines,
Right.
perception action will...
The more they become ingrained in our character.
It's like a loop that becomes easier and more natural over time. The more we turn obstacles upside down, the more confident and resilient we become.
You've got it. And that's the essence of what it means to make the obstacle the way.
Yeah.
It's about transforming challenges into opportunities for growth, for learning, for becoming the best versions of ourselves.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I think we can distill the wisdom from these sources into 3 core principles.
Okay.
Perceive things as they are, act with courage and determination, and endure and accept the world as it is.
Those are excellent points. And when we embrace these principles,
Yeah.
we unlock the potential to not simply overcome obstacles, but to use them as stepping stones on the path to becoming our best selves.
I love that imagery, using obstacles as stepping stones. It completely reframes the way we view challenges.
Right.
It's not about avoiding them, it's about using them to elevate ourselves to reach new heights.
Exactly. And I think that's a perfect segue into the final part of our exploration,
Okay.
where we'll delve into some even more specific examples and techniques for turning obstacles into opportunities.
Agreed. But before we move on, I want to leave you with this question to ponder. What specific obstacle are you facing right now? And how can you apply these principles of perception, action, and will to turn it into a path forward? We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into the art of turning obstacles into opportunities. Welcome back to our deep dive on turning obstacles into opportunities.
Mm.
We've explored some powerful ideas from Stoic philosophy
hmm
and examined inspiring examples of individuals who have embodied these principles.
It's been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
Mhm.
From cultivating a strong will to embracing amorphody,
Right.
from anticipating challenges to finding strength in something larger than ourselves.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have, and I think what's particularly compelling about this approach is that it's not just about surviving obstacles. It's
Okay.
about using them as catalysts for growth and
Mhm.
transformation.
It's about becoming, as the sources put it, worthy of any and every challenge.
It's interesting how these sources emphasize that these principles aren't just for philosophers or historical figures.
Right.
They're for everyone.
Yeah, there's this great quote from Henry David Thoreau that I think sums it up perfectly.
Okay.
To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically.
It's a powerful reminder that philosophy isn't meant to be some abstract academic pursuit.
Yeah.
It's about living a better life, navigating challenges, and becoming the best version of ourselves.
And the sources actually highlight a whole array of figures from different walks of life who have
Sure.
embraced these Stoic principles.
Hmm.
Writers, artists, social reformers, even economists.
Oh, wow.
We see how figures like Frederick the Great Toussaint Louverture and even Adam Smith
Yeah.
found strength and guidance in the teachings of the Stoics.
It's amazing to think how these ancient ideas have resonated throughout history and continue to influence people today.
And it speaks to the timelessness of these principles.
Yeah.
The challenges we face may change,
Right.
but the tools for navigating them remain remarkably consistent.
The sources even point out that figures like Bill Clinton, Wen Jiabao, and Tim Ferriss
Wow.
have all drawn inspiration from Stoicism.
It's an approach that clearly transcends cultures and generations.
Yeah. It reinforces the idea that you don't need to be a scholar or a sage to benefit from these ideas.
hmm
They're practical tools for anyone looking to live a more fulfilling and resilient life.
Towards the end of the sources, there's this line that really struck me.
Okay.
The essence of philosophy is action in making good on the ability to turn the obstacle upside down with our minds.
It's such a concise way of capturing what we've been exploring throughout this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not about passively accepting whatever life throws at us.
Right.
It's about actively engaging with our challenges,
Mm.
using our minds to find a path forward.
The sources remind us that philosophy isn't about what happens in the classroom.
Right.
It's about the lessons we learn on the battlefield of life.
And like any skill, it requires practice.
Yeah.
We need to actively cultivate the disciplines of perception, action, and will.
It's about learning to see clearly,
Hmm.
act effectively, and endure with grace.
And the more we practice these disciplines,
Yeah.
the more we internalize them
Right.
until they become an instinctive part of who we are.
The sources describe it as a loop that becomes easier over time.
Right.
The more we turn obstacles upside down,
Yeah.
the more confident and resilient we become.
Exactly. It's a process of continuous growth and self-discovery.
So to bring this all together, I think we can distill the wisdom from these sources
Look,
into 3 core principles for turning obstacles into opportunities.
I agree, and those principles are.
First, perceive things as they are. This means letting go of our preconceived notions and biases and seeing the world with clear and objective eyes.
Second, act with courage and determination. This means taking responsibility for our choices, pursuing our goals with energy and persistence, and never giving up in the face of adversity.
And third, endure and accept the world as it is. This means recognizing that we don't control everything, that setbacks are inevitable, and that true strength lies in our ability to adapt and persevere.
Beautifully put. When we embrace these principles, we unlock the power to transform any obstacle into an opportunity.
We become, as the sources so eloquently put it, worthy of any and every challenge.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. Remember that you now possess the tools to navigate the obstacles that inevitably arise in life.
You have the power to choose your perspective, to direct your actions, and to cultivate an unyielding will.
Embrace the challenges, learn from your setbacks, and never stop striving to become the best version of yourself.
The obstacle is not the end of the road, it is the way forward.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep turning obstacles into opportunities.
See ya.